Tonight is Tuesday, November 15th, 2017, and I'd like to call a special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council to order. Councilor Beazall, would you please lead us in the salute to the flag? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please conduct the roll call?
President Kushmarek.
Present.
Councilor Bean. Councilor Boschman. Here. Councilor Beazall. Councilor Clark. Here. Councilor Di Natale. Here. Councilor Donnelly. Here. Councilor Green. Here. Councilor Joseph. Councilor Caddy. Here. Councilor Tran. Here.
Warrant for a special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council. A special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council will be held on Wednesday, November 15th, 2017 at 6 p.m. at Kent Recital Hall in Conlin Fine Arts Building of Fitchburg State University. The agenda will consist of the following this evening: a special presentation for informational purposes from Lamoureux and Pagano and Associates, a report on the feasibility study for 700 and 718 Main Street, and we'll have a public comment then following the presentation. Councilors, as soon as we have the presenters come up here, we're going to sit in the front row. This will be an opportunity to watch the presentation. We'll be able to ask points of clarity, but there will be no deliberation from councilors this evening. Following the presentation, the public will then have an opportunity for public comment and additional points of clarity, and then we'll adjourn. At this point, I'm going to ask our first presenter, Ms. Susan Navarre, Executive Director of the Fitchburg Historical Society, to join us. Councilors will now be seated in the front row.
Do I need this? Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Navarre of the Fitchburg Historical Society. Thank you so much for this invitation to make a very brief presentation on the history of City Hall. The City Hall is the seat of Fitchburg's city government, and it dates to 1852. That is a decade before the Civil War, at a time when Fitchburg had between 5,000 and 6,000 residents. Oops. There we go. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing if this gets forwarded. Yeah? It's over there? Thank you. Thank you. Here's the earlier history of this building. When Fitchburg separated off from Lunenburg to become a separate town in 1764, all civic business was taken care of in the First Parish Church because there was no separation of church and state. So Fitchburg, but by the 1830s, Massachusetts mandated the separation of church and state. So Fitchburg needed to remove the city functions from the church. But luckily, the First Parish was building a new church, and so the town kept that old church building, which is the building that now houses DeBonis and Davin Florist on Main Street. And they just moved the building to its current location, and that became the Old Town Hall. At around that time in 1840, Fitchburg had 2,500 people. But in the next 10 years, the population more than doubled to nearly 6,000 people. And at the same time, the property valuation nearly doubled in that decade, too. And that ended up raising the problem of fitting all of the town meeting members into the old town hall. It only held about half of the voters. So the new town hall was designed so that it could hold 1,500 people, which was the number of voters, in the auditorium. And that's the City Hall building that we know today on Main Street. In addition to the town business and the town meetings, the building was designed to be able to host important speakers, musical performances, and special events. At one time or another, it contained the library, the post office, the Superior Court, a jail, a grammar school, plus also some local businesses. And the location was seen as the perfect compromise between the two sides of town, what are now known as Lower Main Street and Upper Main Street, because they competed with each other at the time for business and services. So at this time, Cottage Street had simpler residential homes around it. That's the street right around City Hall. In fact, it looked a little rural with some of those houses having room for horses or cows. So the city bought the property that the City Hall is on from Dr. Thomas Blood. He was the first dentist in Fitchburg. And his house was then moved just a little over to Cottage Square, and it continued to be used for many years. So the design that was chosen, sorry, let me go back. There we go. So the design that was chosen is based on classical Greek architecture. It's called Greek Revival. Fitchburg actually has many, many homes that were built in the first half of the 1800s that are also Greek Revival in style. By 1852, when this building was built, Greek Revival was a little bit old. It might have been just a little bit out of fashion, but actually using a more conservative, less modern style may have very well seemed like a more conservative and less risky kind of choice. Certainly we know from the records that when the building was done, it was very widely admired. So here we are looking at the City Hall on the left and a classical Greek temple, which would have been the model for Greek Revival. And at this time, Americans thought of the United States as the rebirth of classical democracy, a return to the democracy of ancient Greece. So Americans at this time, they knew how to read this building, the front of the building. It showed that the United States was the natural heir to democracy from ancient Greece. So probably the main ways that you can recognize that this is Greek Revival is from the pediment. That's the triangle at the top. And also from the pilasters, which look like they're the flat shapes that look like columns holding up the pediment. Also, the proportions of the front facade and the proportions of the front to the depth of the building are both similar to those of a classical Greek temple. Also, in this early photo that we're seeing on the left of the building, you can see that it has very elaborate decorations at the top of the pilasters. Those are the original composite capitals. Those were later replaced by the current capitals. They're called Ionic. They're a simpler curving shape. But I'll talk a little bit more about those later. So the fan lights that you see above the doors and the windows, also the round window in the pediment, and also the curving granite decorations over the windows are all typical of this time in how they combine a classic simplicity with an attractive approach to decorating the windows, the columns, and the edges of the building. So the story of the original construction of this building in 1852 is very colorful, and partly because it's linked with a man who was an important politician and something of a local celebrity in Fitchburg. His name was Ivers Phillips. So the story is that the original cost of this building was budgeted at $14,000, but none of the contractors who bid on it came in on budget. So one of the members of the committee, Ivers Phillips, said, I'm going to resign from the committee and I'm going to contract with local craftsmen and they're going to build the building. So Ivers Phillips was a colonel in 2 local militias by the time he was 29. He had started as a teacher, but he ended up investing in factories and railroads. And by the time he was building the City Hall when he was in his 40s, he represented Worcester County as a state senator. He was also one of the original founders of the Republican Party. And later in the 1870s, he moved out to Boulder, Colorado, where he became rich in railroads and mining. But he always returned to Fitchburg very often and stayed in touch with Fitchburg. Well, they did come in on time and on budget. Longtime residents of Fitchburg will know some of the family names of the people who actually worked on the building. The stonemason was S.A. Wheeler. William Goodwin did the timber frame, and Alonzo Goodrich provided the bricks. And there were some firsts in this building. It was the first pressed bricks ever used in Fitchburg that were used in this building. Also, the composite capitals that I mentioned before were actually made in terracotta by Henry Tolman and Sons of Worcester. And they became one of the premier providers of architectural detailing in the United States for more than 50 years, but this was one of their first projects, was here in Fitchburg. So by September of 1852, enough of this building was finished that they could actually host the Democratic State Convention. And then the official opening came just slightly later in early 1853. But at the time of the Democratic Convention, the Lowell Daily Advertiser newspaper wrote about the building, saying, "The new town hall, not entirely finished, is one of the largest and most elegant in the architectural arrangement in the state. It will be a lasting monument to the liberality of the place." So among the many other uses for the building, other than the ones that I've mentioned, I found one that I thought was sort of entertaining. It's a very early story, which is that the Fitchburg National Bank was being rebuilt in 1853. So the bank actually moved its operations into the brand new city hall. So they kept most of their deposits over at the Rollstone Bank, but they kept their cash for the daily needs in the town clerk's vault. And so in order to keep it safe, they required a clerk from the bank named Joseph Tufts that he had to sleep every night in the town clerk's office in order to protect the money. And on a more somber note, many funerals were held in the building during the Civil War for all of the local soldiers that were killed in the war. Also, the Episcopal Church met in the lower rooms of the building, too, for 5 years while they were finishing their building. An expansion in the back was started in 1879. That was designed by local architect H.M. Francis. And of course, Fitchburg has an H.M. Francis historical district. These are the 3 bays at the back of the building, and they were built 4 stories high. So when the 1879 addition was added, the library was moved out of the older parts of the building and moved into that new addition, and then of course, ultimately into the Wallace Library. So there were minor alterations in 1910, again by the H.M. Francis firm, and then a major alteration in 1960. In 1960, the auditorium was taken out in order to create more offices, and the city council chamber was updated. The renovations of the interior in 1960 and again in the mid-1980s meant that virtually none of the original interior remains inside the building. However, the exterior remains for us to see what Fitchburg dreamed of in 1852. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Delaney. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Fitchburg, and I'm also the Chair of the City Hall Building Committee. My role this evening is to bridge what you just heard, the history of City Hall, and then bring it forward to the functionality that we have today, and talk to you about how we got to where we are. And excuse me, the slides being behind me is unusual, so I'm going to try to adapt. Let me go back. So we're going to start in 2012. In 2012, knowing that the building had suffered some structural issues that seemed to be getting worse and worse, Mayor Wong at the time established a City Hall subcommittee who would be looking at recommendations for the future of the City Hall building. And they'd be examining the alternatives to see what they could do. In the meantime, the trust, of course, was starting to fail and then was declared failed. So right around the same time as the committee being formed, the trust failed and the employees of City Hall needed to be moved out. So in September of 2012, arrangements were made to lease and do some renovations at 166 Boulder Drive, which is Putnam Place. And that was to temporarily house the central city operations. And they moved in about October of 2012. At the same time, other operations for the city who couldn't fit into Putnam Place kind of were dispersed around the city in various locations. And again, this was done as a temporary emergency measure because of the nature of the structural problems over at City Hall. This led to a continuation of the work of the City Hall subcommittee at that time. While the City Hall employees were being moved into various locations, the subcommittee continued their work to look at the alternatives and look at what could be done. Putnam Place was always meant to be a temporary solution to the problem. On the slide here, you'll see that there's a couple of excerpts from an article that was in the Sentinel and Enterprise on August 14th of 2012, talking about the temporary nature of the offices being at Putnam Place, and also talking about the fact that the offices themselves were very small and cramped, and that something in the future would need to be looked at as an alternative. So the subcommittee continued their work. Did it not go? Sorry, didn't go. There we go. The people who were put at Putnam Place were meant to be the people that would deal with the public most often. So the setup there was meant for people to come in off the street and be able to have those employees right in front of them. What that also meant is that it created a disconnect between city departments who were not in that location. Oh. Okay, great. So the subcommittee came up with some ideas, and they reviewed 3 sites. They reviewed the City Hall Main Street site, they looked at the 166 Boulder Drive site, and they also looked at the Rollstone Bank and Trust. There were 9 options that they considered for the future of city operations, and they were all listed here. Demolition of City Hall Main Street, demolition of City Hall Main Street but retaining the facade and building new, selling the City Hall Main Street for some kind of development, renovation of City Hall Main Street as a public-private venture, purchasing private property for use of City Hall, reuse of other city-owned buildings, a long-term lease at 166 Boulder Drive as it was configured or with an expansion, building a new City Hall on the existing site or one to be determined, and then renovating City Hall on Main Street. And in November of 2014, the subcommittee made this recommendation. They recommended that City Hall remain on Main Street, and you have a couple of quotes here from that report. The group unanimously voted to recommend the original City Hall building to be renovated and used as the home of municipal government in Fitchburg. One of the quotes was, "The presence of City Hall is vital to the economic and cultural development of Main Street, and its central place in the history of the city requires us as a city to accord this building the respect it deserves." They concluded with, "We strongly urge the mayor and the capital planning committee to move forward with the necessary planning to accomplish this restoration." This was in November of 2014. I'm going to fast forward into the new administration, which came in 2016. No action had been taken on the prior subcommittee recommendation. Mayor DiNatale came into office, and in January 2016, decided that he wanted to have a new approach, and all options were on the table as to what we were going to do about City Hall and where they would be located. In Mayor DiNatale's State of the City address, he said, "It is my promise to you all, Mayor, in some form of another, Fitchburg City Hall will return to 718 Main Street." Immediately after the new administration came in, they started working on tasks to take care of what had been left at City Hall at 718 Main. The following tasks were accomplished there to prepare for the future, whether that meant closing the building permanently or whether that meant renovating or tearing it down. These are things that needed to be done that were accomplished between then and now. So we had the removal and relocation of the remaining City Hall files and furniture. There was a transfer of historic documents, tools, photographs, and other items of interest that we thought the Historical Society would want for preservation purposes. There was a public auction of all the surplus items left from 718 Main Street that couldn't be used elsewhere in the city or didn't have value for the Historical Society. And then we initiated and conducted hazardous materials inspections and testing. Once again, we had to take a look at what was happening at Putnam Place. Putnam Place, again, was not intended to be a permanent solution to the problem. Right now, there's no private area for the public who comes in to speak with city departments. There's nowhere for them to go to have a private conversation. It also limits the public access to any other city department other than the core departments that they want to see off of the street, such as my own department in purchasing. When vendors stop by City Hall to see me, I have to go out to visit them, and we don't have a place to meet and talk. The setting doesn't offer anything in the way of conference space, especially private and quiet conference space, and there are no meeting spaces. The various city departments remain at dispersed locations around the city, so for us to interact with one another and be the most efficient, being in this area and having them elsewhere can create a problem. Employees are also separated from the physical work that they need to do every day because in a cubicle setting, they don't have file cabinets at their disposal. So when someone calls us to look something up, we need to go elsewhere to look that up. And it does create an inefficiency. Not to say that the city employees aren't working really hard to overcome all of those things, but it does create just day-to-day problems. There is inefficient storage. It's, some cases, not up to state standards right now. The storage is a big concern for us. And then we don't have any workstations for employees that are off-site and need to come to a meeting at City Hall and maybe need to sit at a computer. All the cubicles are full. In fact, we don't have enough cubicles. And so we don't have a place for visiting employees to come in, and we don't have a place to offer interns from the college or the high school that come in to help us out. We have no place to put them. So exploring the options, you know, this administration has attempted to exhaust all avenues before looking at building or rebuilding to see if there was anything else that we could do, think outside of the box, to get employees located in a place that would be good for the public, good in serving the general public. So with that in mind, we did look for an RFP in May 2016. A request for proposals went out from the purchasing department seeking properties on Main Street that might be able to be fitted for us to use as municipal offices. Unfortunately, with that round of proposals, the city didn't receive any response at all. So we regrouped a little bit, and in June of 2016, which happened to be upon my arrival here at the city, we issued another request for proposals, and this time we restructured and updated the proposal that we had sent out before. We also did outreach to property owners, we spoke to real estate agents, and got the word out on the street that we were looking to see if there was anything available that we might be able to use for municipal offices. We did receive 2 proposals. One of those proposals had to be rejected because it didn't meet the criteria of the proposal. It was there were some technical issues with that proposal. A second proposal was accepted. We did do a site visit at that site, and it became evident when we were looking at the property that not only did it need a lot of work to bring it into what would be necessary for a public office, but it just wasn't suited to a municipal building, and the square footage wasn't what we needed to have. So having exhausted all those options, it was time to go back and look at 718 Main Street again. So in February of 2017, Mayor DiNatale appointed a City Hall Building Committee. And at this time, I'd just like to recognize the people who are here that are on that building committee. So if you're here, just give us a wave. As I said, I'm the chairman. On the committee are City Council President Michael Kuchmarek, City Councilor Thomas Donnelly, Commissioner of Public Works Lenny Laxo, City Assessor Ken Wilson, City Building Commissioner Mark Barbadoro, Chief of Staff AJ Torigny. The citizen representative is Bill McSheehy. Our business representative is Phil Esposito. Our representative from the Fitchburg Historical Commission is Ellen DiGeronimo. And the Vice President of Finance and Administration at Fitchburg State University, Jay Bry. So that building committee began meeting to discuss how we were going to approach the 718 Main Street project. And while that was happening and while we were having very preliminary meetings, we had an unexpected opportunity come up. The Bank of America building was being vacated, and the mayor approached the Bank of America to inquire about their willingness to donate 700 Main Street to the city. Eventually, in consultation with Lamro Pagano and Associates, the city decided that that might make a good addition to that area and turn that into a City Hall campus. And the other benefit to that would be allowing us to have extra, I'm not going to say extra, additional space once the building was renovated to house people who had been dispersed around the city and bring them back to the campus. So on Monday, August 14th of 2017, the city officially accepted that building. So that leads us into the feasibility study, which is really why you're all here tonight. You're going to be hearing from Lamro Pagano and Associates about the feasibility study. On June 2nd of 2017, the City Hall Building Committee unanimously approved what's called Option 1. And you'll see that option. You're not going to know what I'm talking about now, but you will see that option as Lamro Pagano goes through their presentation. The reason that we made that decision, the group reviewed all of the proposals and reviewed all of the options and talked a long time about how we were going to accomplish getting City Hall back onto 718 Main Street in a responsible way, but in a way that best served the public. And so in our letter to the mayor, when we voted on Option 1, we said, to honor the dignity and historical significance of 718 Main Street and afford a state-of-the-art service for the residents and visitors to Fitchburg, as proposed, City Hall will balance the needs of city departments while creating a positive customer service experience. We recommend Option 1 as our concept choice. The renovation offers a conservative financial approach while making major interior renovations to accommodate community-style offices, interactive counter approaches, much improved layout, and a new vision for outdoor spaces. So where do we go from here? The action items are, obviously, the City Council, the press, and the members of the community have now had a chance to look at our feasibility study documents, which are published also on the website if anyone wants to go back and look at them. They will remain there throughout this period. Today being November 15th is a special meeting of the City Council where they'll hear the report on the feasibility study for 718 Main Street. And our building committee looks forward to working with the City Council to determine a plan of action moving forward. At this point, I would like to turn this over to our friends from Lamro Pagano and Associates, who are going to do a much better job kind of describing and giving you a vision of what we're looking at for 718 Main Street. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening. My name is Bill Sunicle. I'm a senior project architect at Lamo Pagano Associates, Architects in Worcester, and with me is Leo Parker, fellow architect in the project. Leo is day-to-day manager of the project. I did the big thinking, so to speak. What we're going to try to do right now is what Mary said. We're going to try to go through our study, but we're going to do it succinctly. The study is some 500-600 pages long. It's a compilation of work done over, I'm not quite, we started in January, and we're here today, and I don't think we've stopped until this afternoon working on the project and trying to understand it. First I'm going to say is what Susan gave her speech on what what City Hall was, I should say, the history of it is. I've learned something right there, and so that's always good. There's always something I'm learning about architecture in the building. And with Mary talking about the different committees, the one committee in the 2012 that she spoke about, I never saw that. If I did, I missed it. But the recommendations that committee had back 5 years ago were recommendations that we came up with. So there's some basis that makes the project make sense in that we didn't come up with anything that is totally unique and original. It's been thought about before. Then save City Hall or take it down and put a new building up. So we have 5 options here, which Leo will go through in the after I'm done trying to bring you up to date with what we did with the study and how it progressed. So, again, as I said, we started in early January. Actually, I have slides that are dated January 1st, so it must have been before we were actually went to be interviewed for the project when the RFQ was put out. And I remember walking around. It was a cold day. No leaves were left anywhere, and it was really bleak, and the building looked bleak. And but that really made me start thinking, what a nice building it is. I mean, what a wonderful building. And then we started to get into the history of it and studying it, and with the help of Mr. Geronimo giving us information, sending us information, studying, taking a look at the environment. Every time I came, I kept seeing, wow, this is a special building. I drive down Main Street, and it's perched or positioned in just the exact position where its prominence is there. But each time we learned more, walked through it, went through it, saw that there was nothing there, as been reported. It was a complicated building. You can get lost in the building. I don't know how many people have been in there when the last time you've been in there. A whole series of stairs. When it was added on to in 1879, the stairs didn't match. It was very confusing in there. So that was a challenge, which I knew we could take care of that. It's doable. We can fix that and make this building work. But our charge was not only to just renovate the building, but to take other looks at it. What if we took some of it down? What if we took the whole building down? That was our charge in the request for proposal that we received. So we did go through that, and as I said, there are 5 different options that Leo will spend some time going through explaining what they are and how we ended up with option number 1, as Mary talked about. Again, looking at that end of Main Street and seeing the theater block, knowing that Fitchburg University had previously purchased it, maybe the year prior, saw that that could be a real catalyst. And they said, certainly City Hall could be a catalyst. And as Mary said, the bank came along. We started to look at it a little from the air. If you could, Leo, the next slide, please. So we started to think about this as more of a study, not only a study of a building, but a place. What could this, excuse me, what could we do? I mean, we can just work on the building, and that's kind of antiseptic, but there's more to it. There could be a campus, as Mary called it, and what we're showing here is our idea, essentially, a look at the possibilities. And really quickly, some of the items, like G, which is the parking lot that's in the rear, that's needed. The garage is needed. We need that parking area for the employees of the City Hall, as well as for people, the public coming to visit. We're also hoping that, there's about 100 spaces there. We're hoping that it's so busy that people actually have to park on the street and start using Main Street again, walking to City Hall, to start getting, you know, Main Street lively again up at this portion of the city. By having the bank, City Hall, we're able to, and actually I should say, reducing the amount of Cottage Lane, the road that now circles City Hall, by just reducing it on the south side of the building, removing it completely, we're able to build a small plaza, which is shown as right now with a green space and some paving. There is a item called H, which is, we call it, it's a platform that could be out there, maybe could be someone up there playing a small duet or something, could be playing during the summer. We could use this area for, thinking of farmers markets, it could be a place where the Latin festival could be. We're trying to make the area, or the thought is, to be more than just City Hall, to be a place, to have it work in symphony with the theater block across the street. You can see we've actually put a direct, what they call a nub into the street, which will help to control some of the traffic and make a relationship with the other side of the street and in the theater block as well as the rest of Main Street. In 2012, the city had a report done, and the way they talked about Main Street was pretty interesting. They broke Main Street up into 4 parcels, 4 themes, and they said that the upper commons area, they called it the arts area for the city. The midsection where this is was the banking, the governmental, the legal area of the city, and further down on the south became the retail area, and then even further down became a gateway. So using that, thinking about that, each of these, and if you looked at their plan, and you looked at, and you know the city much better than I do, each one of these areas has a park within it. And this one, of course, has Renaissance Park, the little park to the north side of the City Hall, and we just thought that's such a great park. It was a really, really nice spot that we could incorporate that, so we have a real entity in this portion of the spot, which is the legal part, the governmental part. What you see is a quick elevation of what we look like on Main Street with the bank. There's an entrance, which is A-B, which is it's a gateway. So we were actually promoting the plaza behind, and from Main Street, there's a definite item that says, this is the way to enter into the space. It makes the space much more lively. Of course, the restoration of City Hall itself and Renaissance Park. So it's a pretty simple elevation, but it gives you an idea of, how that all could be tied together. And if you could think behind that elevation, it could be a splendid park, a splendid area for the town, for the city to enjoy. Next one, Leo, please. Again, it's the same thing. What we've done is we're just giving you a little bit of a bird's eye view as opposed to straight on. So you get a sense of the scale and how the massing would be. It's exactly the same. We're showing the plaza out there where Mayor Denali could go out there and give his speech and address the throngs, or anybody else can use that sort of. Again, Renaissance Park and anchoring of that portion of the Main Street. Leo, please. Now, as Leo goes through, there's a couple items that, or Susan, I have to help Susan with her study too. City Hall, as was originally in 1854, and that's you can see a demarcation line through the building, And as we go through, we're going to talk about 1854 and 1879, so we're just trying to, so you understand what we mean when we talk about, 1879 section being demolished or not, so you understand exactly where it is. Actually, in 1879 section, which is, as is shown to the left-hand side here, those dormers were put on, we don't know when. They have nothing to do. You can actually see, and Susan had shown this, this is the building as it looked in 1879, where the eave line was constant around the building. And you'll see some other sketches that we've done of how we would restore it and bring it back to look at that. In preservation, you pick a time. We could have picked 1854, which would be only the small portion of the building, and that would be it. Or we picked 1879 is the time that we'd want to bring the building back. But as I said, we explored other options. We actually tore that 1879 down. Next slide, Leo, please. The other thing Susan didn't know is that a lot of the, above all the ceiling, is the ceiling of the Grand Hall. And so when we talk about restoring the Grand Hall, there's a lot of fabric left, which people don't even know it's there. And it's just literally what they did is they hung a ceiling at 8 feet across the space, and they abandoned everything above it. So if you look at to the right, it's maybe a little hard to see, but you can see the groin vaults, and you can see in the colored pictures where we took it in the dark, and you can see all the detail that's there. So restoring it is possible to do, but we would have a lot of fabric that we could start from. There are other photographs that show when the in 1912 when the roof collapsed. There's several photographs that show that in the Grand Hall, which you probably can't see. Everybody's looking up. There's actually about this much seating in a balcony. So there's a balcony there with maybe 10 rows, maybe not this much seating, but that could be restored. So we show that in the options. And there's a lot of fabric left in the building. There's not much left when you walk through it. It's all been 1960s, and it's been cut and spliced together so many times that it makes no sense to even look at the building in the sense of let's keep this room, let's keep this room. Let's start from start from scratch, and that's how we best approach this building. Get the program done, which we've done. We've worked on that with Mary and with AJ and with Ken, and we believe we can fit all the items that are needed, the different divisions, different people into the building, that in the bank building. So I'm going to let Leo go now and talk about the different options at this point.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, hopefully the slides are reading well. I've noticed a couple of the titles and numbers are getting scrambled around a little bit from using different equipment than we formatted the presentation for, but hopefully most of it will be readable for you. So as Bill had mentioned, we produced this large study. It's several hundred pages. We're going to try and condense that down a little bit for you tonight and cover most of it, but obviously we can't cover all of that tonight. But generally, I want to talk a little bit about the existing conditions, the process that we went through, which involved that study, the existing conditions, the programming, how we determined what needs to go into the building, the size that's required, the design concepts that have been mentioned that we've studied, the budget recommendations, and the final recommendations that were decided with the committee. So starting with the existing conditions, as you've heard, the former City Hall located at 718 Main Street was built in 1853, or opened in 1853, and had an addition in 1879. Holds a prominent station in downtown area of Fitchburg, and the downtown area is made up of a combination of existing and proposed historical districts, cultural and economic districts, and has the potential to be a very vibrant community asset. And the City Hall is considered a local historic landmark to the community. It's listed in the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System within the downtown architecture of H.M. Francis. and it's recommended for listing in the National Register of Historic Places on the Massachusetts Historical Commission inventory form. So as such, the project is required to follow the Massachusetts Historical Review and Compliance procedures. But overall, the building and site is in a general state of disrepair, and the building layout no longer meets the city's functional needs. As you've heard, in 2012, the building was determined to be uninhabitable due to the trusses and needed to be vacated for the operations to work elsewhere. And also the adjacent parking deck was considered part of the City Hall property and site has been demolished as well due to deterioration. And the former Bank of America building, which was built in the early 80s, has been included in this study for consideration. As you heard, that was gifted to the city. And it is generally a sound structure. However, many of the systems in the building have reached the end of their expected service life and are not adequate for today's code demands. So the previous reports that were done and documents that were done earlier in 2003 and throughout some of the timeline that Mary spoke of earlier were used as a baseline to determine if the existing conditions and the basic assumptions have changed, and they have not. As you've heard, no work has really been done to the City Hall during that time period. So the existing conditions in the City Hall building and site have only deteriorated more since the original studies and the findings were reported. So to speak a little bit about the program now, the space needs program for the City Hall Municipal Office were initially done in an earlier study as well, through questionnaires and interviews and observations with the several departments in the City Hall. And that was in 2003, and that program was used as a basis for developing the current space needs. And discussions were held with the city's administrative designees and to review the previous space needs and update the program where necessary. And the new program actually reduced some workstations, increased and shifted others, and made some adjustments to office storage space, and generally looked at all the additional needs that might be needed for the contemporary use of the City Hall. And it actually resulted in a slightly reduced program overall, but what was not looked at with that at the time was the additional items that are needed for the City Hall to function. The updated program information provided didn't include the allowances for the internal building circulation required to meet today's standards, the stairways, new elevator, the full number of toilets to meet the current code requirements, and long-term storage needs and other various support space requirements that are really needed to bring this up to date and make it a great space for the community to come and use. So when those additional space needs are factored into the given program, the existing hall building is not adequately sized to meet the program without making compromises. And utilizing the bank building that we have next door makes a great convenient solution to that, because it actually can function as an annex for some of the departments and helps alleviate that condition. So it's very necessary for the program in the City Hall to operate with everyone in a central location. And parking on the site and site development requirements have also been considered in the program. Staff parking determined by totaling the occupants in the building from the revised study had about 62 spaces required and approximately 30 additional spaces included by the public. And that's reflected what you saw in the site plan, and that parking garage and some surface parking around the site. So in addition to the space needs and parking and the technical scope of services in the program, it includes developing an all-encompassing vision for the City Hall. And through discussions with the City Hall Building Committee, the vision for the City Hall was defined as maintaining the essence of the existing City Hall's place in the community while generating more people traffic at the site as a catalyst for revitalization of the downtown area. So as we go through the design concepts next, as you heard, we did several of them. That was an underlying factor, and a lot of that was contained in actually the treatment that we did on the site and trying to develop that as a campus approach. So after the careful analysis of the existing conditions and the space needs of the City Hall program, 5 design concepts were explored to meet the functional and restoration requirements of the project. And those options can be categorized in 3 general approaches. You have complete renovation of the existing 1853 and 1879 structures. You'll see that in options 1 and 2. And then you have a renovation and addition, where the main portion of the City Hall in 1853 would remain and would demolish the 1879 addition to provide space for a new updated addition. And then the last option for those kind of 3 approaches would be new construction completely, and that would demolish both sections of the building and structure. But we were looking at keeping portions of the original 1853 facade to recognize the historic significance of the building, and a new building would actually be constructed in the footprint of the original building right behind the pieces of the facade that we would keep in place. They would actually wrap Main Street and down part of Cottage Ave. So in all the concepts, the bank building is being used as the annex to supplement the space needs provided in the City Hall main structure. So in the study, it considers the existing building, the site, including the parking, circulation challenges, to propose a range of concepts within these 3 approaches. And as has been mentioned, we basically had 5 approaches, 5 concepts to go with those approaches. Option 1, which actually is up on the screen in back of me now, is a selective demolition and renovation of the existing structure with adaptive reuse in the auditorium area, where it was built out as offices similar to what was used previously. We have another additional option that is similar to that, option 2, which is selective demolition and renovation. But in that one, we actually looked at bringing back the main hall auditorium space. We have options 3 and 4, which looked at a renovation of the 1853 portion of the building and tearing down the existing 1879 to make way for a new addition. And then finally, option 5 is the new construction option that I spoke of. So in all the concept options, the previously demolished parking structure is rebuilt. And the bank building is also utilized in all the concepts as an annex to supplement the space needs. And of all the options, there are concepts that represent different approaches for meeting the goals and improving the site and permanently locating the City Hall back at 718 Main Street. So these options, when you look at them, they shouldn't be taken as final designs. These options aren't developed as schematic designs. Again, they're preliminary options, and they're really a conceptual layout of the options are for the purpose of testing the feasibility of the various approaches and developing a preliminary budget recommendations for an order of magnitude comparison of the various options. So a selection can be made for a direction to really move forward and study further. So we'll get into a little more detail on the options now. So up on the screen is option 1, which, as we mentioned, includes a selective demolition and full renovation of the complete 1853 structure and the 1879 addition. So let's see, do we have? Yeah. So we have the plaza elevation there. So what you'll see is one of the most noticeable features on the exterior of the option is we actually removed the existing dormers that you saw in some of the earlier photographs. Let's see if I don't think my pointer's quite going to work. But there were some dormers back in the 1879 edition. There we go. That one's a little more powerful. There we go. Okay, so again, you saw on the slide that Bill had showed, there was basically a demarcation between the 1853 and the 1879 edition. Originally, the 1879 had some dormers in that area. And again, one of the main features that we're trying to do is bring back a little bit of the original history of the 1853 building. And part of that was removing those dormers and cleaning up the roof line to bring back a little bit more of that original character of the building, as well as reconfiguring the existing modified window openings to restore a more historically correct elevation. Along with some of the exterior features that I just mentioned, would replace the Main Street stairs and platform with a cleaner, redesigned access landing that would include an accessible ramp. And there's also an accessible ramp at the plaza side entrance that incorporates a viewing platform. And those can be seen there. That was what you saw in the site plan that Bill was referencing, where Mayor Natale could speak from. So the interior layout of the building is organized with the primary public service departments, such as the assessor's office, the city clerk, and the treasurer on the first floor level. That's that level there. And then the mayor's office, large meeting spaces, including the council chamber located on the second floor. Remaining departments would be on the upper floors. So the basement level, which has quite amount of space that can be used. It's really not suitable for office space, and it's designated as storage, mechanical, electrical, and support spaces for the building. So in this option, as we mentioned, kind of the difference in the option you'll see following this is in the second floor, the 1853 portion of the structure, which was originally the Grand Hall that you saw some photographs of, and again, that's essentially this area right here. That was that terrific black and white picture of the auditorium. In this option, that portion of the structure, which was originally the Grand Hall Auditorium, is built out with a council chamber, large meeting rooms, a lunchroom, and a few smaller departments with some required support. But for those areas, the large rooms would utilize the building's original double-height space and create the appropriately sized volumes for the functions that will be using them and expose the original window height. So right now, it's really chopped up. You saw some of those photos with the low ceiling, all that insulation piled up. All that's going to be taken out and cleaned up, so we'll have much more appropriate space on the second floor for the council chambers, and again, expose a little bit more of that interior detailing around the windows. But this one is not bringing back that full ceiling details that you saw in the photos. Let's see. So with the build-out of the second floor in this manner, a majority of the City Hall space needs are contained within the 3 floors of the building, and this leaves some space available on the 4th floor in the 1879 portion of the building that could be developed in future phases of the City Hall renovation. And as you see, the 4th floor here, so the 3rd floor, that's really just all above the space that I spoke on the 2nd floor. And the 4th floor in the 1879, that's all attic space. We do have some office space there, and again, you'll see some portions over to the side right now that are really left over for some future expansion. So that is one good advantage of this option 1 as well. So again, the bank building is developed as an annex to the City Hall. You can see the plans actually in this lower corner here. And so what will go in there is actually the Board of Health and the building department will occupy that area. And the bank building is well suited to serve these functions of these departments because it allows extended hours of operation required by the health and building departments. So with a separate annex, it enables the public and employees to access those departments outside the main City Hall operating hours where you wouldn't need to heat the full building and such. So it becomes a very well-suited use for that building and function for those departments. Okay. So option 2 is very similar to option 1 in most respects. The exterior treatment is the same as option 1, as we mentioned, with the windows, trying to bring back the more historically correct elevations and removing the dormers. The primary difference, and again, it also follows the same general internal layout as well, with the primary public functions happening on the 1st floor, the mayor's office and council chambers on the 2nd, and sort of the remaining offices happening on the 3rd and 4th floors. The primary difference is that on this option 2, the 2nd floor in the 1853 portion of the structure, we brought back the Grand Hall for the auditorium use. And you can see that in plan right in that area. So the auditorium will have a stage and a balcony as in the original 1853 design. However, the revised use will not be the exact same as the original design. The intent would be to capture the original spirit of the 1853 Grand Hall and bring back as much detailing as practical. Again, some of those details that you saw in the photo. And the primary program use for the Grand Hall would be to serve as the council chamber and to accommodate public meetings. With the addition of some movable partitions, it could be subdivided and the space could be used for smaller group meetings as well. Space may also be used for additional community events and gatherings, as well as outside groups could utilize the space. So option 3 is the next two options. You'll see we actually get into the ones where we take down the 1879 portion of the building and provide a new addition in that area. So again, it's selective demolition with full renovation of the 1853 portion of the structure, and it's full demolition of the 1879 addition to make way for a new addition. And again, that becomes quite evident in the elevations compared to the earlier ones. You can see quite a change between the 1853 elevation and potentially a new addition. And that's really the exterior highlight of this option as well as the next one. So in the 1853 section of the existing structure will receive a full renovation with a redesigned front entrance, the landing and with the accessible ramp, and the reconfigured windows for the more historically correct elevations. And then probably what most of you notice right away is that the new addition does not replicate the look of the 1853 building. And this concept for the new addition follows really the principles outlined by the Secretary of the Interior Standards and Guidelines for new additions in historic buildings. And the point would not be to replicate the exact details from the earlier one. Number one, it would be very costly to try and bring those back with today's standards. And again, the guidelines are really not meant for that to take place. The new additions to historic buildings, they should be designed and constructed to be clearly differentiated from the historic building. The work shall be differentiated from the old and will be compatible with historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportions, and massing, but again, not try to replicate the building. There should be a clear demarcation between what's new and what the existing building was. And the elevation in option 3 is, and again, it's not intended to represent necessarily a final schematic design. The elevations present a concept that illustrates an example of these principles outlined by the Secretary of Interior Guidelines for the purpose of testing the feasibility of the addition renovation approach. So the new addition has the main, option 3 has the new addition where the main entrance at the southwest end of the building facing the new parking structure, if you recall the site plan. And so in plan, that would be one of the primary entrances. If you recall, the parking was over here, and again, that would be a primary public entrance for this option. So option 4 is quite similar. Again, it's that addition renovation concept, but this one actually has some slight differences, primarily being the entrance on the first floor off of what would be the plaza area in the site plan. Again, so it includes that selective demolition of the 1853 portion of the building with the full demolition in 1879 for the new addition. And the same general organization has been employed for the interior layout with the primary public functions on the lower levels, the mayor and council chambers second, and so on moving up the building. And again, this option as well follows those same guidelines for the Secretary of Interior for additions for historic buildings. And as I had mentioned, with this option, the main entrance located on the southeast side of the building facing the proposed new plaza space, the entrance on this side of the building reinforces that campus concept approach. And the plans and elevations, again, are meant to be just a test of the feasibility study. They're not to be taken as a final design at this point in time. And again, they're meant just to to have a slightly increased level of complexity to show potential of a range of variations that could be done with these type of approaches. And did we go to 5? Yes, okay. So option 5 is a new construction utilizing the existing facade. So I mentioned earlier, this option proposes to demolish the existing building with the exception of portions of the 1853 facade. The existing Main Street elevation and the northeast elevation will be maintained and restored in recognition of the historical significance of the original 1853 City Hall building and its standing within the Fitchburg community and the fabric of downtown. So the new construction is actually inserted behind the existing facade and almost the same footprint as the existing building. It does allow the option to expand that slightly and have a little bit more flexibility in the layout. So again, the general organization is the same as the previous options. The Main Street entrance of the building will be maintained with the existing historical facade with those updates that I mentioned earlier. And again, this option, it would have its main entrance on the southeast side facing what would be the proposed public plaza area. Again, that would become really the primary entrance as you enter the site into that public plaza. You would have the main entrance to the building off of that side, and really that Main Street elevation would become more of a ceremonial entrance at that point. And again, this, the new construction option with the existing facade takes the same visual approach as the addition and renovation options following that Secretary of Interior's guidelines for new additions to historic buildings. And while the new construction is not an addition to the historic facade of the 1853, enough of that historic facade of the 1853 buildings maintained in sufficient proportions to warrant treatment in a similar manner. So those were really the, let me see, I don't know if we want to go to that one yet. So those were the 5 options that were studied throughout this process, again, utilizing those approaches of renovation of the complete building, renovation, addition, and new construction. And they each have, their own merits and limitations, and those were debated among the committee to reach a final conclusion. And in general, option 1 and 2, again, have very similar merits. They rehabilitates the structure with a high degree of historic restoration on the exterior. They provide flexible, option 1 provided that flexible space on the 4th floor for future programming and development during design. Option 2 had the addition of the Grand Hall, which is a very attractive feature to bring that historic element back to the building. But both those options had some very similar limitations in the fact that you're dealing with an existing structure. The 1879 portion of the building, the floors don't line up with the 1853 portion of the building. They have very low ceiling heights. So as a result, there is a fairly high degree of compromise in the program space needs. You have to work around a lot of that existing structure. And as well, the mechanical and electrical layouts become a little more challenging to deal with. So once you get into options 3 and 4, with the addition, some of those limitations are mitigated slightly because you're providing a new addition, which allows a little bit more flexibility, but you're still limited some in the 1853 portion of the building. But again, primarily they eliminate the most inefficient portion of the structure, the 1879 addition, and that allows for improved layouts of the programming, and again, allows you a little more efficient use and planning for the mechanical spaces. And then, option 5, with the new construction, really has the most advantages as far as it eliminates all the inefficiencies of the existing buildings. It maintained the historic elevation, so it satisfies a lot of the requirements to meet those demands within the city and recognize the significance of the building. And again, it gives you the opportunity to really have efficient layouts for the mechanical and electrical systems throughout the building. And really, there's very little as far as limitations, except for, again, maintaining that initial front entrance, which there is an elevation change. And all these options, the Bank of America and the parking structure, have the same relationships in all the options. So all the concepts and options respond to the vision for the City Hall by maintaining the presence of the existing building at the site, and the community has historical recognition as its municipal center. All the options incorporate that campus plan approach as a means to open up public space for activities and generate more people traffic in the area as a catalyst for the revitalization of downtown. So after considering all these design concept approaches and options presented to the City Hall Building Committee, the complete renovation approach of option 1 was chosen for further development. And I must say that the consideration of cost was a primary concern for the direction by the committee. So we'll get into a little bit of the budget recommendations at this point that went along with that and helped guide that decision to choose option 1. So all these approaches and the options were developed to a sufficient point that we could bring in a professional cost estimator to look at these options and help us provide a general order of magnitude cost consideration for each of the options for comparison. And at this point, they were done based on a very general square foot cost using historical data for similar projects, similar types of functions with the amount of renovation and the use that the building would see. And again, the goal was for this primary budget recommendation to allow a fair order of magnitude cost comparison of the options by the City Hall Building Committee so they could select one for further study. And as I mentioned, they chose option 1. And as you can see from, there we go, the general graph up above here, that includes the general renovation costs of the City Hall, the bank annex, the site work, the garage. We came up with a range for total construction costs, and we added soft costs to that as well to come up with the total project cost. And again, at this point, it was very general with a broad brush approach using very basic square foot cost numbers. So each of those provided a fairly wide range for a budget number, but again, gave a fair order of magnitude comparison so you can make a selection on which direction to go. And again, option 1 was chosen there. As you can see, as you go across, option 1 was the least costly, going to option 2 where we brought in the Grand Hall, brought that price up a little bit. Options 3 and 4, the addition and renovation, again, were a little bit more costly. And option 5, the new construction, was deemed the most expensive option out of all those. So there had to be a real study of the balance between the cost and, again, those merits and limitations that we spoke of earlier. Ultimately, the decision was to pursue option 1 in more detail. So at that point, we did a little bit more work on option 1 with technical requirements and really kind of did an outline specification to form a basis of design and go back to our cost estimator for a more detailed cost analysis on it. And at that point, he did narrow that range for the cost considerably, and it does fall within that original order of magnitude cost projection that we're looking at. But again, with the more detailed estimate that was done after that initial direction for option 1, the budget recommendation falls between, $21,568,000 and $23,839,000. And again, it's within that order of magnitude range that was projected in that first option. So after considering all the design concept approaches and options presented, the City Hall Building Committee selected, as I mentioned, that complete renovation option 1. And the City Hall Building Committee has reviewed and discussed those merits and limitations of each option along with the budget, as I spoke of. And the consideration of cost was a primary concern for the committee that they expressed to us. So the complete renovation option 1 represents the best value to the City Hall Building Committee to meet the city's goals of permanently locating the City Hall Municipal Headquarters at 718 Main Street. Option 1 retains the essence of the existing City Hall place in the community and offers the opportunity to be a catalyst for the revitalization of Fitchburg's downtown district with increased people traffic. And again, I just want to mention that these options are presented they're not intended to be the final design and go unchanged as this process moves forward. With the selected direction from the City Hall Building Committee, the preferred option should be studied further and fully developed with close attention to the functional needs of the City Hall and the details of the existing conditions. And that is a fair recap of all the information that's in the study. So, and again, as I mentioned, the next steps would be to continue the project development. Should you decide to go forward, again, with that option 1, really dig into the details and look at the programming requirements in a lot closer attention, get into really studying those existing conditions further to push this to the next level. As I mentioned, these were preliminary options, and they need to be taken to schematic design and further.
Thank you, Leo. I'm just going to add a little bit on this estimating portion of it. Our experience with preservation, existing buildings, we're always going to get the question, you never know what's going to happen, and you're going to find an existing building, and that's where cost overruns come. How can you hold these numbers? And I have talked to the building committee, well, to the mayor and to AJ and Mary and so forth, and I have suggested through our experience, and I'll use experience of one project, which is Hanover Theater, which I was the project architect for that. We literally begged the owner to do demolition first before we started any drawings and specifications. I would strongly suggest whether we become the architect, a new architect, that be a process that should be undertaken. Go in there. We know that nothing is salvageable in the building. Literally send out one contract for demolition before the architect starts drawing and starts doing pricing. Then you know what you're up against. You can do the drawings effectively, and it takes all the guesswork out. So that's a suggestion that I give to this project, that it's a building, a lot of stuff is hidden in there. You should expose it all before you really start to go into drawings and get bids. This way, it's everybody can see what's happening, and you certainly can reduce that unknown factor. Never 100%, but way in the high 90s. And as I said, in Hanover Theater, we did not do that, and it was, I can't, we should have done it. It just was impossible to try to do a drawing based on some photographs, and we ran into conditions that were totally unexpected, and we don't want that to happen at this project. I mean, you certainly shouldn't have it. You should take that, what I'm suggesting, and try to go with that as a process. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, so to say, now you know why he's the managing architect.
And I'm going to take a real long minute to get that up so anybody that wants to just stand where they are and stretch for a second. That's okay with me. Go ahead. Okay. This one? Is this one on? Hello? Oh, good. My name's Calvin Brooks. I'm the city auditor for the city of Fitchburg. I was not on the building committee, but I was brought in late in the process once the group had decided what they wanted for an option and asked me to work on the numbers. They've come up with an estimate for cost, and my job is to say, all right, how does the city pay for it? I've noticed that the other presentations have used a lot of red because I know Fitchburg's color is red. But since I'm an accountant, I don't like red. So I'm using blue. So if you watch any of the HGTV shows, House Hunters, Island Life, any of those, people go out and they're looking for a place, and they're usually given 3 options. The first option, the house of your dreams, everything you wanted, kind of expensive. Second option is the house that meets your needs, you can afford it, it's, you know, pretty good. And then the third option that's cheap, a fixer-upper, looks great, you know, it has a lot of potential, but a lot of hidden costs with it. So I look at the City Hall options as being similar. We could do a brand-new City Hall for $40+ million. That's one of the options that they had looked at. Would certainly meet our needs, would be everything we wanted, but unfortunately, we can't afford it. The option that's been recommended is for renovation of the old City Hall for about $23.5 million. Affordable, meets our needs. Third option would be to stay where we are on 166 Boulder Drive. But to do so, we'd have to build out the storage area to provide more office space and more meeting space and more room for the operations we have there. Would also require mothballing Old City Hall. I was explaining this to somebody that didn't know what mothballing was. That's, you know, in the old days, you put mothballs in your wool so they wouldn't get eaten in the summer. So it's just basically preserving the old City Hall in some fashion. You'd have to replace the roof because that's what it needs. That option is certainly affordable, but would not meet the needs of the city. And I think if you talk to City Hall employees, we will generally say where we are is okay, but we'd really like something a little different. There are constraints with it. So the option that's being recommended is City Hall renovation. You notice the picture here doesn't have the fence around the building, so it's an older picture. And it almost looks like it was taken before we moved out. The fence around the building is because the slates are falling off the roof, so it's done for a safety reason. There's asbestos in the building that we have to deal with if we choose to do nothing. Certainly, when you see the picture there, it looks like it has a lot of potential. So when we look at the numbers, the cost estimate, as you just heard, is from $21 million to $23 million. This estimate includes sufficient contingencies for unforeseen expenses and so on, allows for either a contractor at risk or design build process, and it includes all parts of the project, design, engineering, site work, construction, furniture and fixtures, as well as putting up a parking garage and renovating the Bank of America building. So what the plan going forward is that the mayor would recommend a project budget of $23.5 million, and that would be done by 2 loan orders going to City Council. One would be a loan order for, two orders to City Council. One would be a loan order for $22.5 million, which would eventually turn into a 20-year bond. And the second is a money order from available funds for $1 million. The $1 million out of available funds would be to cover our first-year costs, our costs of work from now until June 30th. What that would do is allow us to put off having to borrow for a full year, and that allows us to to stretch out the repayment schedule, and it works in our favor from a budget standpoint. If we borrow in FY19, the city would make interest-only payments in fiscal 20 and 21, and then in 22 begin to make principal and interest payments. And as we go through the analysis, also in consideration are two other projects that have been discussed earlier. One is the Crocker School renovation, and the other is the library renovation. Before we get into that analysis, I just want to talk a little about why the city wants to have debt. Well-managed debt is a good thing. If you're buying a home, you get a mortgage. It allows you to pay over time for a large, high-costing asset. You're getting the benefit of it while you're paying it off. Your house might last you 40 years and you get a 20 or 30-year mortgage, so you still get a benefit at the end. It allows for the payment of the asset over its life, and for the financial markets, it also shows that we're managing our assets well because we're reinvesting in the assets that we have. So as we look at this issue, I guess the question that needs to be answered is this project affordable? So what we're going to do in this analysis is show how the debt service projection spreadsheet was calculated. And I know my assistant, or my deputy auditor, Jackie Cronin, was passing out a cream-colored sheet of paper that had a lot of numbers on it. And I know numbers make some people go glassy-eyed, so I'm going to pick it apart and just go through it very quickly for you. First step would be to calculate what our current debt is. Next would be to add in future projects and future estimated projects. And then we'll add some budgeted capital spending to calculate the budget impact. So what we're going to start with is our current debt. And the figure for 2018 of $4,236,345 is from the FY18 budget. It's the sum of, in the general fund, of both the principal and interest payment that we make at the current time. And you also will notice that our current debt is fully paid off by 2023. After that, we have no more debt due that's currently borrowed. In order to evaluate the budget impact, we also have to subtract the reimbursement we get from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or MSBA, of about $2 million a year. That's for the Fitchburg High School. And when you put those two numbers together, you get the current net debt. That's the impact on the budget for our debt at the current time, $2,311,399. There was a drop from FY19 to 20. That's when we pay off the high school debt and the fire station debt. Next, we want to calculate the projected debt service. So we're starting with our current net debt, which is what's currently in our budget. We then look at currently borrowed loan orders. We have borrowing outstanding right now for two projects. They're not permanently borrowed. That's why they haven't shown up on other lists. They're currently temporarily borrowed. One is for the parking garage repairs. We most recently did a joint ceiling project at the Putnam Place garage. We also have to do some drainage work there and concrete work. The airport is a $500,000 borrowing for the work at the terminal and Hangar 7. What we're going to add to that is the borrowing for the City Hall renovation. Because we're spending $1 million of available funds, we won't have to borrow till fiscal 19, and so our payments begin in fiscal 20, and then principal payments beginning in fiscal 22. For anyone that's interested for these calculations, I've used a 3% interest cost on the temporary debt and 4% on the long-term debt. Those are probably a little high, but I think in budgeting, it makes sense to budget a little high, and then when you come in, your actuals should come in under that. We would also, in doing an analysis properly, have to include future projects. So we've added in here both the Crocker School and the library. Crocker School, the project is currently submitted to MSBA is for a $60 million project. The MSBA will reimburse us 80%, so the city's share is $12 million. And that's what's estimated here. The library, the mayor is committed to putting $6 million toward the library project. They have a grant for part of the share. They're doing fundraising for part of the share, and then there is a part that still needs to be addressed. So when we add them all together, we get our projected debt service. Now, one of the things you notice is that the debt service actually goes down for 4 years before it takes a big jump up in 2022. That's when the debt for both the City Hall renovation and the Crocker School could possibly hit. And that's a lot to absorb in 1 year. So we'll do something to help with the budget impact. So what we're going to do is start with the current projected debt service. And then we're going to add what I'm calling budgeted capital spending, and that will add to the budget. Budgeted capital spending would be spending on capital items that we might usually we would have borrowed for. Equipment for the police, fire, and public works, major repairs on buildings, things like that. But because we have a little bit of a gap in our debt service, we can take that excess capacity and use it to spend directly on projects. One of the projects that's already being bandied about has to do with the Longjo School roof. I understand it leaks there, and I know that the school department, as well as the City Hall and the mayor's office, are looking at what it would cost to repair the roof, and whether or not it's within the city's ability to use some of this budgeted capital spending to directly pay for the repair or reconstruction of those roofs. So when you add that all together, you get the projected budget impact. And what you notice is that there's a gradual progression up of the amount being spent. For 4 years, it increases about $350,000 a year. Wrong button. You see right here where the increase is, and it's about $350,000 a year. And that way we would gradually build the budget in order to absorb the 3 projects that we're talking about. So in summary, over the next 4 years, the city budget for debt service and budgeted capital spending would increase approximately $350,000 a year. City would use budgeted capital spending to cover costs of smaller projects and capital equipment. As we go through the budget each year, we will also be reviewing our estimates for the future projects. Is the Crocker School still at $60 million? Is it going to be less or more? How do we manage that? What's going on with the library project? Do we commit more or less to that? What is its status? And I think with this increase, we'll also show that the city is investing in itself and putting back into its capital assets and trying to do a better job with what we have than I think perhaps some people feel the city has done in the past. So in closing, I just would say that I believe that the renovation of City Hall can be managed within the city budget. Thank you.
At this point, everyone, I'd ask for a 5-minute recess, and we'll invite counselors back up to hear questions from the public and, or rather, public comments. So 5 minutes, and we'll resume. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone once again for being here. Thank our viewing audience watching us via FATV this evening. I'd also like to take the opportunity, I was remiss earlier by not thanking our gracious host, Fitchburg State University. President Rich Lapidus was joining us earlier, and we're still joined by a member of the City Hall Building Committee and Vice President at Fitchburg State University, Jay Bry. Jay, thank you for being so gracious and hosting us this evening. I also want to thank the presenters who spoke earlier, Ms. Susan Navarre, Mary Delaney, our architects with Lamoureux and Pagano, as well as Calvin Brooks. Thank you for the informational presentation. And this is an opportunity for the public to provide comment to us councilors. There will be no deliberation this evening as a body. This is an opportunity before the council then reviews and deliberates on the orders that the mayor will put in front of us for City Hall to hear your comments and concerns moving forward. So that said, I would like to open this up to public comment. Each person will be given the opportunity to speak for not more than 3 minutes. I'd ask when you approach the center mic that you speak slowly and clearly to introduce yourself by name and street and city address for the public record. Any comment you say will be recorded live on TV as well as recorded in the minutes of our meeting this evening. That said, I'd like to invite members of the public to speak at this time. Good evening.
Hi, Sam Squalia, 225 Scott Road. I have some questions from this presentation. Okay, so I have, what will our available bonding capacity through 2045 for other capital projects that may arise be? In 2016, the Longsdale renovation was estimated at $11 million. What is our plan for bonding for this in the next 5 years? Do we have a plan for expanding our landfill land, the cost and the availability of us to pay for that? So we are planning for donations for the library project, but none for City Hall. I see the library renovations are listed at $6 million in our budget, so in the debt service projection. So the Sentinel reports that we'll need $19 million, so that's a $13 million difference. Okay, and regarding 166 Boulder Drive, I see anecdotal slides and informations for the problems from 166 Boulder Drive, yet no part of the $90,000 study included an actual study of the potential space for reallocation at 166 Boulder Drive. So is it possible to rework the up to 5,000 square feet of storage space at 166 Boulder Drive to an off-site or nearby storage facility and put our conference room or other office spaces that we lack? Why was there no feasibility study to consider this? A study for our fire department service recommended relocating and rebuilding our John Fitch Highway and Oak Hill Road stations. Are these projects planned for any time through our 2045 debt service projections? I would have liked to see a consideration for a request for proposals from private parties for reuse of our old City Hall from a private developer commercial use. Commercial committed developer use has precedent in successful reuse of government buildings, mixed use, condo, retail, assembly. I'm afraid this project might not be considered cost feasible to any other entity other than government funding, but it might have been nice to see that the feasibility of that proposed. Accessibility, I see that all of them were accessible in option 1. That was good. Okay. Let's see. With the proposed renovation, what is the proposed storage area requirement square footage? Is that adequate for our needs, or will we require off-site storage? With the current proposal for option 1, the most inexpensive option, we are getting the least efficient building and the least efficient space. And as cited, the reasoning of that was cost. Was there any feasibility of temporarily tearing down the rest of the building and utilizing the facade as an option 4 for a number of years while we saved enough money to consider the future building that we want? It was suggested that the cost estimates, as stated, have an unknown factor from the design firm, running into conditions that are totally unexpected, which is very common. If the cost of the project exceeds the projected $23.5 million, where will we be getting our required excess funding from? And I'd just like to restate, we will be paying, with this proposal, $384,000 extra from our budget in 2019, $337 extra in 2020, $315,000 extra in 2021, and $367,000 extra in 2022 from our budget. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm David Streb, 377 Highland Avenue. I was curious about the option, the preferred option. I know that in the old City Hall building, there was a real issue with the floors not meeting each other. The back of the building had 4 levels, front of the building had 2, and it was very difficult to work around from an accessibility perspective. And I just wanted a clarification about is the option 1, is it the complete removal of all the floors inside and essentially like a gut rehab? You're keeping the shell of the building and building the whole thing from scratch, and that gets rid of that problem?
I'm going to ask our architect. I think this is an important question that should be answered this evening. If you wouldn't mind jumping on the mic, sir, and just addressing this question briefly.
Option 1 leaves the floors where they are. We cannot remove the floors. The floors are structural as far as this building is concerned. They hold the walls out. But what we've done is reorganized the spaces. And the introduction of a new elevator will be a 2-sided elevator. So you're able to, accessibility, be able to go half levels throughout the building. And as I said, we have simplified the stairs, where essentially the stairs are at both extreme ends of the building, and we've opened up continuous corridors through. So for accessibility, again, the elevator is such that it has a double-sided elevator. You're able to go half flights, so you reduce all that, the problem of having chair lifts and that type of thing. But there's no real way to effectively remove floors in option number 1. That was what we were exploring in the other options. But we can solve the problem, so it's not like it used to be. I mean, it is a maze in that building, so hopefully that answers this question.
Thank you. Are there other further questions from the public here this evening? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Ellen DiGeronimo, and I live at 197 Bridle Cross Road in the city of Fitchburg. And I will state for you the fact that I did have the joy and pleasure of serving on this committee, but you probably aren't surprised that I do have some ideas and thoughts. But I also want to bring to your attention that I had an opportunity to really hear and meet many of your new professional employees. And not only did they provide us with wonderful answers to questions, good questions to ask, and Calvin's proposal at the very end was just remarkable. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that they did an amazing job. However, 165 years ago, the City Hall opened. I have to take my glasses off because I didn't bring my other glasses. The decision makers at the time were determined to create a handsome building to conduct the business of the city of Fitchburg. Today, the current decision makers are again faced with the decision to provide a building to conduct in a dignified way the city's business. Several options were considered, as you now know. But the decision to focus on restoring City Hall at 718 Main Street was the one that we chose. This decision, along with the fact that Fitchburg State University's decision to invest in the theater building, I believe creates a significant economic engine for the revitalization of Main Street. And I don't know of anyone who doesn't think that that's an important endeavor. It encourages reinvestment of the other properties on Main Street. And this project demonstrates respect for the city's history. It provides an appropriate environment for those charged with conducting the city's business, and more importantly, it is a wonderful opportunity to reinvigorate the pride in this wonderful city that you have the privilege and joy of representing. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to have served on this committee. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public wishing to speak at this time? Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Charles Sternamolo, 19 Fox Street, Fitchburg. I serve on the Historical Commission, and I just wanted to say that I 100% the mayor's proposal. I like all 5 options, whatever the mayor decides, anything to save that historic building and re-energize Main Street, I'm on board with. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ann Dakota. I'm from 47 Putnam Park in Fitchburg. I have a question regarding option number 3. And I guess I didn't know if option 1 was set in stone yet. But option 3, I think, is of interest because I don't know if that would alleviate some of the floor issues if you were able to do the old with the new. And I think Fitchburg, I'm not a native of Fitchburg, but I do find the architecture here one of its highest gems or value gems that we should respect. I do believe in the historical preservation of things. I work for the Fitchburg Art Museum, and we have an old building with a facade done by H.M. Francis, and they were able to build in 1989 a newer building, so that's the old with the new, or the historical with the future. And I think the 5th Street Bridge as well. I'm married to an engineer and a brother-in-law, both civil engineers. They wanted the truss bridge, I believe it was. And I think that has historical reference as well. But when Fitchburg kind of ordained and took on the newer bridge, it gave Fitchburg a new bridge to the future, really. So I think that option 3 might be a possible way to mix history with the idea that Fitchburg wants to move forward and have new ideas and new people.
Thank you very much. And I'll ask Mary Delaney to correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding, option 3 would have exhausted our entire debt capacity and not allowed us to explore any of the additional projects that are aligned with the city's future needs as well. So option 1 was really the only option the committee felt that fell within the city's debt capacity, as well as allowing us to explore additional long-term concerns. Is that correct, Mary? Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Josiah Richards. I live at 199 Fisher Road. Thank you for the presentation this evening. It was actually very interesting to see all the different options. I think as a taxpayer and a few others around the city, I've heard from, or me personally, I'll just speak for myself. I'm just a little concerned that we're borrowing from the stabilization fund, so lowering it and I, maybe jeopardizing our bond. I'm getting a no over there, but I'm just wondering if maybe a couple more fiscal years might buy us a little more time and capital resources to explore some of the other options. Like for example, what Ann said about option 3. That's just my thought, my civic opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, the option would be taking $1 million out of this year's current free cash allocation. The stabilization, the long-term city stabilization account would remain untouched with the presentations that were presented this evening. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Susan Navarre, and I'm not a Fitchburg resident. I'm actually a resident of Leominster, but I'm the director of the Fitchburg Historical Society, speaking here only as an individual who loves architecture. I was very struck in the presentation by the emphasis on the placement of City Hall and what this historic structure accomplishes at that fulcrum of Main Street, where Main Street turns, so that you see it from two different parts of Main Street. And I thought, I just wanted to emphasize that part of their proposal, because I was very struck by how important that could be for Main Street to be able to see this beautiful historic building in both sides. And I thought that was very exciting about this option. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Susan Rotzer. I live at 57 Village Crossing in Fitchburg. And just as a matter of information, this afternoon the Mass Cultural Council spent the day at the Fitchburg Art Museum talking to us about the programs that we're working on prospectively, particularly with respect to our interest in helping to develop the building at the old B.F. Brown School building and the other two buildings that are accompanying that. Mass Cultural Council, as you may know, is the sponsor of the Mass Facilities Fund Building Fund, and has, through that fund, invested in a number of sites in Fitchburg. Some that come to mind are Fitchburg Historical Society, the Art Museum, the theater adjacent to the Fay Club, and actually a number of other locations as well. They spoke glowingly of the investments that people are making across the board in the city of Fitchburg. And they talked about the relationship of those investments to the development of the cultural economy here, and how that is the beginning of potential economic development, all along the corridor of Main Street. We fully expect at the Art Museum that if we are able to develop the project and bring in residential housing at that location, we can contribute substantially to the foot traffic on Main Street, and all of the accompanying services will come along after that, restaurants, services, and other things. It's a really exciting time of Fitchburg, and I think it's a testament to all of the different groups of people who have come to the conclusion that restoring City Hall is a really important piece of that. And it's a bit of a leap of faith. It's a lot of money, but I think we've heard tonight that it's fiscally sound and possible to do this. And certainly there would be a lot of cooperation around that concept and energy devoted to the development of Upper Main Street. So thank you for considering this.
Good evening.
Good evening, councilors. Anthony Zarella, 33 St. Paul Street. I'd like to say, first of all, that I think all involved in this project, in putting together these proposals, have done an excellent job in a real critical analysis of all the factors involved. I like to see that. There's been some clear thought put into this, not just brainstorming, and it's great to see. It's very thorough, and actually very easy to understand the way it's been presented. I'd also like to say, though, that this is, I feel, essential. This is essential because I've had the opportunity to interact with the current City Hall, the building, I mean, both as a citizen and as a member of the zoning board. And every employee I've encountered at the Boulder Drive location has been hardworking and dedicated, but it's a mess. It's through no one's fault. They're all doing their very best. But if I want to talk to someone, they either need to traipse up to the front desk, or I need to be buzzed in and then stand over their shoulder at their desk while I talk to them. And it's clear just looking that there's not enough space for all the files and paperwork and everything. There's zero privacy, and our boards don't have adequate meeting spaces. We're finding space where we can because there is no centralized space, and none of the spaces we're using are really fully adequate, either for the business of the board or for public accessibility. So I am very strongly in favor of getting a centralized city hall up and running again as quickly as possible, because I've heard from so many people over the past several months that one of the primary obstacles to coming in and doing business in Fitchburg, either as a home buyer, as a business person, is simply getting from department to department to department and board to board. And if we have all that integrated again, I think we're going to see a much more streamlined process for people who want to be in Fitchburg. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak at this time? Good evening.
Hi, I'm Jackie Stanton from 90 Caspian Way, and I moved to Fitchburg in 2010, and I had my first occasion to go to the City Hall, and driving up Main Street, I was just bowled over with this gorgeous building that I came upon, and I was like really excited to go inside because I just thought it was beautiful. And then, I don't know, a couple of years later, I read in the paper that they were closing it. I was very upset, so upset that I wrote a letter to the editor, and I've never written a letter to the editor before. And so I'm very excited to be here today and to learn that we're going to bring it back to some vibrant form of use. And I just, you know, whichever option it is, I'm just glad we're going to keep it and use it, because I really think that our history, if we don't embrace our history and know where we came from, how do we know where we're going to go? And, you know, it's a beautiful city. Let's keep it beautiful. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak at this time?
Hi, Josiah Richards from 199 Fisher Road. I actually had more of a question, I think, for the architects. The hall, the existing Great Hall in this space, could that later be renovated if we go with option one? Because from what I understood in the design plans, that would not be renovated? Or am I interpreting that wrong?
That is a difficult question. The reason why it's difficult is when option one is done, all the mechanical systems, electrical systems, sprinkler, everything is going to be made to fit that option. Nothing is impossible, but as we could undo that fabric essentially and take out the council chambers, but we'd have to go through the whole building and reorganize how it'd be done. And Option one has additional, there is additional space on the fourth floor, as Leo said, for some growth, which is good. Not enough growth to really take over the council chambers, so we'd have to really do some mixing. Again, it's possible to do that. It'd be much more expensive, obviously, after undoing something you've already done and try to do it again. What Leo said is when we do option one and put in the council chambers, we intend to get that ceiling back again. We intend to get the essence of what the space was. We're not going to put the balcony in. We're not going to put all the stage in, but we're going to have a space when you walk in, you're going to say, wow, this is nice. It's not going to be an 8-foot ceiling. We're going to have the full height of the windows, so we'll have the essence of the hall. And I'm very excited about the fact that what's left going to give us a good indication of what we can do, and I think it'd be a very, very nice space. I think it'd be a very nice space that you may not want to undo, actually, to be quite honest with you. And again, the study from the building committee was not so much that they didn't like the city hall, but there's not really a need in the city. There are other places that can do that. And I don't know of all these places, but they've said the senior center, there's a meeting place and so forth. And it'd be an underutilized space that, and they didn't feel it wasn't a good fit for the community. So that's why, it was selected. Not only for monetary reasons, but for other, other thought processes. So I hope that answered your question as best I could.
Is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak at this time?
Good evening, councilors, Your Honor. My name is Bob O'Brien. I live at 114 Bishop Road. I think that a lot of good points have come up. These are all laudable goals, from historic preservation, economic stimulus. However, I just do not feel that the city can afford it. $23.5 million, I believe, is the estimate with any government project. You can bet that's going to be about $40 million. I wonder who has done the financial analysis for this. We're going to fund this with a bond issue. My question would be, what is our current exposure for outstanding municipal bonds? And are we going to maximize, that is, max out our credit limit for bond issuing? And if we do, what's the plan for any unforeseen expenses that come up for the city of Fitchburg? Now, right now, we have, I believe, $179 million unfunded for our pension funds and health plans. We also have a antiquated water pipes and sewer systems that don't comply with federal and state standards. The roof on Long Joe School probably has 1 or 2 winters left in it. The heat on the 4th floor doesn't work very well. So while this might be a laudable goal, I wonder if it is fiscally responsible to get something that we want rather than something that we need. I'm all in favor of having a streamlined process, et cetera. I just think that we can approach it from a more financially responsible perspective. And if we fail to make our bond payments, does the city go into receivership? And a city in receivership is not a pretty thing. And if we cannot make our bond payments, do we then raise property taxes? Then what happens to property values? I think more than deciding on a design of a building, we should be looking at the financial aspects. That's all I have. Thank you.
This time?
Good evening, Stacy Fenton, 114 Bishop Road. When I look at this, I hear, and listening to people tonight, I hear romance and I hear sentiment, Fitchburg's glory days, and a call back to it. The romance of the City Hall, how wonderful it was, how it extends from the past into the present. But what I am not hearing is a recognition of where we actually are today. Where we would like to be, yes, but we are not Newton. We cannot afford a glorious municipal office campus. And when I look around this room, the people behind me, I see an overwhelming amount of them, I'm sorry I was running, are over 50 approximately. The taxes and the burdens from this are going to go forward 20 years, and they're going to fall on working families. And I find that completely unacceptable because as technology is changing, filing cabinets, again, not a particular absolute need for this city. I really think the money is better spent elsewhere. It would be a nice thing to have. We have excess capacity at our existing facility, and I would like to see it sent back because this is simply not something we can afford. Romance and great ideas are wonderful, but the future of this city are working families, people who are under 40, who have children, who are looking for good schools and amenities like playgrounds and parks, not City Hall. It is not benefiting, it will not benefit the people that we would like to see come to Fitchburg and make it home. That's my statement, and thank you very much for your time.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak at this time?
Make a motion, we close public comment.
I have a motion and second to close public comment at this time. Anyone speaking to the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous. Public comment is closed. I just want to take an opportunity again to thank our host, Fitchburg State University, this evening, to thank Fitchburg Access TV for broadcasting to those at home. I'd like to thank those who came this evening and those who voiced their public comment for the City Council. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. And that said, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? It is unanimous. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.